He learned of her betrayal the moment she slid divorce papers across the oak table they had picked out together, a silent admission of 6 months spent with another man. Yet, the collapse of Brandon Atkinson's marriage wasn't the end of his story. Brandon, the unassuming grocery manager who had set aside his dreams for the sake of his family, stumbled upon a treasure that would alter his life forever. While his wife exchanged stability for a fantasy, Brandon opted for transformation. Armed with newfound wealth and purpose, he rebuilt his life, thriving in ways no one, not even his wife, could have anticipated. And then, he vanished. It was this remarkable story that inspired a blockbuster film, earning accolades and recognition, including Best Picture. But before we delve into the riveting twists and turns of this tale, let me know where you're reading from in the comments below. If captivating stories like this are your thing, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one. The kitchen was unusually quiet for a Saturday morning. The golden Alabama sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting soft, dappled patterns on the table where Brandon Atkinson sat. This was the same table he and Riley had chosen together over 2 decades ago. A sturdy oak piece that had witnessed countless family meals, heartfelt discussions, and the occasional argument. But today, it felt like an unyielding wall between them. Across from him, Riley sat with a manila envelope in her hands, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically against its edge. Brandon glanced at her, noting how little she seemed to have aged over their 25 years of marriage. Her light brown hair still shone, neatly styled as though she had just left a salon. She wore a simple yet flattering outfit, her toned frame reflecting her dedication to jogging in recent years. She exuded calm confidence, though the way her lips pressed together betrayed a hint of tension. For Brandon, this moment felt surreal. He had spent years managing the local grocery store, carving out a comfortable life with Riley and raising their twin daughters, Alice and Rachel, who were now thriving at Columbia University. Their life wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, or so he had thought. "Brandon," Riley said at last, her voice steady but tinged with resolve. She slid the envelope toward him. "What's this?" he asked, his voice steady but quiet, a sinking feeling already taking root. "Divorce papers," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. Brandon froze, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. He blinked, his mind struggling to process. "Divorce?" he echoed, barely above a whisper. "Yes," Riley said, softening her tone slightly. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's not because of anything you did. You've been a good husband, Brandon, a great father." He stared at the envelope, its bold black letters, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," standing out starkly. His thoughts raced back through memories. Their high school romance, their modest wedding, late nights rocking their daughters to sleep, and the small joys they had shared. None of it added up to this. Leaning back, Brandon's gaze shifted between Riley and the envelope. "I don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "Why now? After everything? After all these years?" Riley sighed, her composure wavering briefly. "It's not about you, Brandon. You've done everything right, but I've found someone else." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. His jaw tightened, and his hands gripped the edge of the table. "Someone else?" he repeated, disbelief evident in his tone. "Yes," she admitted, meeting his gaze with quiet resolve. "His name is Derek Grant. He's a real estate developer. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. Brandon's chest tightened as the walls seemed to close in. The life they had built, their home, family photos on the walls, shared dreams, all shattered like fragile glass. "You're leaving me for him?" he asked, his voice strained. Riley hesitated before replying. "It's not that simple. Derek, he's ambitious. He's passionate about life in a way I admire. And I need more, Brandon. I need to feel alive again." Brandon shook his head, her words incomprehensible. "I turned down promotions for you, for the girls. I stayed here because I thought it's what we wanted. What you wanted. Was that a mistake?" "It wasn't a mistake," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "You were perfect, Brandon. Too perfect. But sometimes perfection isn't enough." The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon stared at the envelope, her words pressing down on him like a physical weight. He felt blindsided, betrayed, and utterly powerless. Finally, he broke the silence. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Riley replied softly. "The papers are straightforward. You'll keep the house, the cars, and all the money in our accounts. I don't want anything, except a fresh start." Brandon's eyes searched hers, looking for an explanation, a reason, but all he found was finality. "Just sign the papers," she said gently. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." He sat there, unmoving, as the weight of her decision sank in. The life he had built, the sacrifices he had made, the love he had given, it was all unraveling. "I'll sign them," he said at last, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need time to process this." Riley nodded, gathering her things. "Take all the time you need," she said, before leaving the room. Brandon remained at the table, staring at the envelope as sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting long shadows on the walls. For the first time in years, the house felt unbearably empty. Brandon often felt the weight of the silent tension that now filled their home. He frequently revisited the choices he had made earlier in life, the career moves he declined, the relocations he avoided, and the chance to own a chain of stores. All opportunities he passed up. "It's not worth uprooting the girls," he'd say, convinced that keeping the family stable and together was the right decision. He dedicated himself entirely to his family, working long hours and taking extra shifts during the holidays to ensure they never lacked anything. Beyond his job, Brandon poured his energy into fatherhood. He was the dad who stayed up late helping with science projects, taught his daughters to ride bikes, and never missed a parent-teacher conference. He took pride in being a provider and protector, believing it was enough to keep his family strong and united. For Riley, however, Brandon's unwavering stability began to feel like stagnation. She admired his loyalty and work ethic, but as the years went by, she couldn't ignore her growing desire for more. She had envisioned a life filled with excitement, driven by bold decisions and new adventures. Instead, they had created a life defined by predictability. Riley never doubted Brandon's love for her or their daughters. He was everything a husband should be: faithful, dependable, and respectful. Yet, as time passed, she felt overshadowed by his sacrifices, her own dreams fading into the background. When their daughters left for college, the fractures in their marriage became undeniable. The shared purpose of raising a family, which had once held them together, now only emphasized the distance between them. Riley began jogging and spending more time outside, searching for something to fill the emptiness she felt but couldn't articulate. Quietly, she resented the life they had built, not for its comfort, but for the dreams she felt she had traded away. The soft clinking of Riley's spoon against her coffee cup was the only sound in the room. Brandon sat across from her, his hands tightly clasped, the divorce papers untouched on the table between them. "I think you owe me an explanation," Brandon said at last, his voice steadier than he felt. Riley hesitated, her eyes flickering to the envelope before meeting his. "You're right," she said quietly. "You deserve the truth." Brandon's chest tightened as he prepared himself for her words, but nothing could brace him for what she said next. "I've been seeing someone else," she admitted, her voice soft but unwavering. The words sliced through the air, leaving a sharp silence in their wake. Brandon blinked, the weight of her confession making it hard to breathe. "Seeing someone?" he echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. "Yes," Riley continued, her voice gaining strength as if she were forcing herself to push forward. "His name is Derek Grant. He's a real estate developer." Brandon's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice low and strained. 6 months, Riley confessed, her hands tightly folded in her lap. "It wasn't something I planned, Brandon. I didn't go looking for this. It just happened." Brandon let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "It just happened? That's your excuse?" Riley flinched but held her ground. "I know how it sounds. I'm not proud of what I've done, but Derek, he's different. He has this energy, this ambition. He makes me feel alive." "Alive," Brandon interrupted, his voice sharp. "Is that what you're going to say?" Riley nodded, her expression a mixture of pain and resolve. "Yes, I know it's unfair to you, but I can't ignore how I feel anymore." Brandon leaned forward, his voice rising with barely contained anger. "You can't ignore how you feel. What about me, Riley? What about the life we built together? Does that mean nothing to you?" "Of course it means something," Riley said, her voice breaking. "You've been a wonderful husband, Brandon. Truly. But I've changed. I need more than this." "So what's the plan?" Brandon asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You run off with Derek and leave me here with a pile of paperwork?" Riley straightened, her expression hardening. "I'm moving in with him. He has a place overlooking the river. It's what I want." Brandon stared at her, the woman he had loved for over 2 decades, and for the first time, she felt like a stranger. The walls seemed to close in around him as the reality of her betrayal sank deeper into his heart. "Do you even hear yourself, Riley?" Brandon asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. "You're throwing away 25 years for what? A man you've known for 6 months? It's not just about Derek," Riley said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's about me, about what I need." "And what about what I need?" Brandon shot back, his voice rising. "I gave up everything, promotions, opportunities, because I thought we were in this together. Was I wrong?" Riley's expression softened, guilt flashing in her eyes. "No, Brandon, you weren't wrong. You did everything right. That's what makes this so hard." "Hard for you?" Brandon said bitterly. "You're not the one being blindsided. You've had 6 months to figure this out, to plan your escape, and now you want me to just accept it?" "I'm not asking you to accept it," Riley said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I'm asking you to let me go." Brandon stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He began pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe this," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "All these years, and this is how it ends." Riley stood as well, crossing her arms over her chest. "It's not easy for me either, Brandon," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I hate that I'm hurting you, but staying in this marriage would hurt us both even more." Brandon stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Do you know what hurts the most?" he asked, his voice quieter but no less pained. "It's not just that you cheated. It's that you didn't even try to fix this. You didn't even talk to me." "I didn't know how," Riley admitted, tears glistening in her eyes. "And maybe, deep down, I didn't want to." "I'm sorry, Brandon." Her sincerity was clear, but it did little to dull the ache in his chest. He looked at her one last time, seeing a stranger where he had once seen his partner. Without another word, Brandon turned and walked out, the soft click of the door behind him marking the end of a 25-year chapter. That night, Brandon sat alone at the kitchen table, the divorce papers signed and sealed. The house was eerily quiet, but his thoughts were anything but. Amid the storm of emotions, a faint sense of clarity emerged. His old life was gone, but the choice to rebuild was his. Memories, anniversary mementos, and other sentimental keepsakes presented the most emotional challenge for Brandon. After deliberating for some time, he made a firm choice. He would keep the family photos that included his daughters but part ways with anything that solely represented his marriage. As the days passed, the house began to shed its identity as a shared space, and instead became a reflection of his newfound independence. Determined to move forward, Brandon contacted Max, a longtime friend and real estate agent. Ever optimistic, Max assured him, "We'll price it just right and sell quickly," during their brief call. While the thought of leaving the house brought a twinge of sadness, Brandon knew it was a step he had to take. Simultaneously, he addressed the financial aspects of his separation with equal determination. He opened fresh bank accounts, canceled joint credit cards, and ensured Riley's name was removed from every shared document. He even transferred the phone account solely into his name, small but significant steps that symbolized his commitment to moving forward. A few weekends later, Brandon organized a yard sale, clearing out years of accumulated belongings. The experience was cathartic, yet surreal, as neighbors stopped by to browse, share casual small talk, and offer their sympathy. By the end of the day, the driveway was clear, and the house felt lighter, both physically and emotionally. With the proceeds from the sale added to his growing savings, Brandon began to consider his next move. A long overdue 3-month vacation emerged as the perfect way to reflect and recharge. One evening, Brandon sat on the couch, his phone resting heavily in his hand. Of all the difficult steps he had taken, breaking the news to his daughters, Alice and Rachel, was by far the hardest. After taking a deep breath, he dialed Alice's number. "Hey, Dad," Alice's cheerful voice greeted him. "How's everything back home?" Brandon hesitated before replying. "Everything's fine, honey, but I need to talk to you and Rachel about something important." "Is everything okay?" Alice's tone shifted to one of concern. "It's about your mom and me," Brandon said, steadying his voice. "We've decided to separate." A long pause followed, the silence on the other end only broken by Alice's quiet breathing. Finally, she asked, "Separate? Like divorce?" "Yes," Brandon confirmed. "It's mutual. We both agreed it's the best decision for us." "Does Rachel know?" Alice asked softly. "Not yet," Brandon admitted. "I was hoping you could help me break the news to her." "Of course," Alice said gently. "But Dad, are you okay?" "I will be," Brandon assured her, trying to project confidence. "This doesn't change how much we love you girls. Your mom and I just grew apart." When Rachel joined the call, the conversation unfolded in a similar way. Both daughters were initially shocked, but ultimately supportive. "Are you sure you're okay, Dad?" Rachel asked, mirroring her sister's concern. "I am," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm so proud of both of you. That will never change." Before hanging up, Alice added, "If you need anything, just call us, okay? We're here for you, Dad." Their words of support gave Brandon a sense of strength he hadn't felt in weeks. As he set the phone down, he felt a renewed determination. While he had lost a marriage, he had gained an opportunity to rediscover himself, and his daughter's faith in him gave him the courage to start fresh. The crisp morning air greeted Brandon as he trekked along the rugged trail at Hayes Ridge, a vast expanse of forest and hills spanning over 2,000 acres and managed by the local land trust. Equipped with a GPS and a metal detector slung over his shoulder, he felt an unusual calm. Geocaching had always been his escape, a way to clear his head while indulging in the thrill of discovery. Today's mission was to locate one of the oldest survey markers in the area, rumored to be buried deep in the woods. After nearly an hour of pushing through dense underbrush and dodging poison ivy, the metal detector emitted a sharp beep. Brandon knelt, carefully brushing away dirt and leaves until a weathered brick monument emerged, its bronze plaque confirming it as the marker he had been searching for. He snapped a quick photo, satisfied with his find. Just as he prepared to leave, the detector signaled faintly again. Intrigued, Brandon retraced his steps, scanning the area until the signal strengthened a few feet away. He dug cautiously, his fingers eventually scraping against something solid. After several minutes of effort, he unearthed a small iron box wrapped in oil-soaked canvas. Heavy and rusted, the box had a craftsmanship that suggested it was from a bygone era. Back at home, Brandon placed the box on his kitchen table, debating whether to report his find to the land trust. Curiosity won out, and he carefully snapped the lock with bolt cutters. Inside, nestled in aged cloth, were 12 large cent coins, each gleaming as though untouched by time. Brandon's breath caught as he lifted one out, the intricate designs and sharp inscriptions still visible. Realizing he had stumbled upon something extraordinary, Brandon spent the evening comparing the coins to illustrations in an old book his grandfather had given him. Each coin, minted between 1793 and 1857, was a remarkable piece of history. One stood out, a pristine 1793 chain cent, the first coin struck by the U.S. Mint. Brandon knew enough to recognize its rarity and significance. Hours of research confirmed what he had suspected. These coins were incredibly valuable. Similar finds had fetched tens of thousands, even millions, at auction. "This can't be real," Brandon muttered, double-checking his findings. But the evidence was undeniable. He had uncovered a life-changing treasure. The discovery reignited a spark in Brandon, replacing the numbness that had followed his divorce with a sense of excitement. He carefully secured the coins and began researching reputable dealers and auction houses. For the first time, the quiet grocery manager was stepping into a world of high-value collectibles and negotiations. The future, once uncertain, now felt full of endless possibilities. The sharply dressed receptionist led Brandon into a private office, where Leo Adams, co-founder of Adams & Burns, greeted him warmly with a firm handshake. "Mr. Atkinson, welcome. I've heard you've brought us something exceptional," Leo said. "Thank you," Brandon replied, settling into the seat across from him. He unfolded high-resolution photographs of 4 coins from his collection, each carefully labeled with its details. As Leo examined the images, his professional demeanor gave way to genuine admiration. "These are extraordinary," he said, pointing to a particularly pristine 1793 chain cent. "The condition alone makes it rare. But this belongs in a museum." Brandon allowed himself a small grin. "I thought so too. That's why I'm here. I want to sell these 4 coins, but there's one condition." Leo arched an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" Brandon slid a letter across the desk. "I'd like Adams & Burns to purchase a piece of land in Alabama and donate it to the local land trust. It's valued at $6,000, and the proceeds from this sale should cover it." Leo read the letter in silence, his face unreadable. Finally he glanced up. "That's an unusual request." "I know," Brandon admitted. "But the land trust is protecting something special, and this would secure their efforts for years to come. You'll get a tax benefit, and I'll know the land is safe." Leo leaned back, studying him thoughtfully. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Atkinson. But it's a compelling proposition. After a brief pause, he nodded. We'll move forward, provided these coins meet our appraiser's standards. They will, Brandon said with quiet confidence. As they finalized the details, another figure entered the room. Adelaide Langley, the firm's co-owner, extended her hand with practiced elegance. Her presence was striking, confident, poised, and effortlessly refined. Mr. Atkinson, she greeted with a warm smile, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard wonderful things about your collection. Her tone was friendly, yet her authoritative demeanor made an impression. Brandon shook her hand, surprised by how at ease she made him feel. The next morning, Brandon received a call from Adelaide. Mr. Atkinson, she began, her tone light. Would you have time to join me for coffee before your flight back to Alabama? There's something I'd like to discuss. Curious, he agreed. They met at an upscale cafe near Central Park, where Adelaide wasted no time. I think you're underestimating the value of your coins, she said. An offshore account might be the best way to manage the proceeds. Brandon hesitated. An offshore account? Isn't that complicated? Not at all, she reassured him. It's about security and discretion, especially with assets of this magnitude. If you're interested, I could guide you through the process. I'm headed to the Cayman Islands tomorrow for business and could arrange for you to join me. The offer took him by surprise, but there was something compelling about Adelaide's confidence. Before long, he found himself on a first-class flight to the Cayman Islands, seated beside her. The trip was a mix of business and leisure. Adelaide's sharp insights and financial expertise made their meetings productive, while her wit and charm turned their meals into moments of genuine enjoyment. Over seafood and cocktails, they swapped stories, her life filled with high-stakes deals and international travel, his rooted in family and simple routines. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of her oceanfront condo, Adelaide regarded him with a thoughtful expression. You're different from most people I work with, Brandon, she said. They're all chasing the next big deal, but you're grounded. Brandon chuckled. Grounded sounds like a polite way of saying boring. She shook her head, smiling. Not boring, genuine, it's refreshing. For the first time in months, Brandon felt truly seen. Not as a divorced grocery store manager, but as someone of value. By the time they returned to New York, the offshore account was established, and an unspoken connection had formed between them. As Adelaide walked him to his cab, she handed him a key. For my spare room, she said casually. If you ever decide to move to New York. Brandon watched her walk away, feeling both inspired and overwhelmed. The future no longer felt uncertain. It was a blank canvas waiting for him to leave his mark. Back in Alabama, Brandon reviewed the final transaction documents from Adams and Burns while sipping his coffee. The sale of the 4 coins had gone smoothly, and the proceeds, securely held in his offshore account, represented a level of wealth he had never dreamed of. For years, his life had revolved around tight budgets and careful planning. Now, for the first time, he had financial freedom and a growing sense of ambition. The discovery and sale of the coins had sparked something within him. Brandon began diving deeper into the world of coin collecting, joining online forums and connecting with dealers to learn how to maximize the value of the remaining coins in his collection. Late into the night, he would scroll through listings, his newfound interest blending seamlessly with a budding entrepreneurial spirit. With this newfound confidence, Brandon sold his Alabama home, thanks to Max's expertise, and started preparing for his move to New York. This wasn't about running from his past. It was about embracing a new beginning. Each decision, updating his wardrobe, selling the house, reinforced his belief that he was capable of much more than he'd ever allowed himself to imagine. Adelaide's influence lingered, her unapologetic approach to life shaping his own. Why settle for comfort when you're capable of greatness? She had asked him during dinner in New York. The question echoed in his mind, pushing him to set ambitious goals and pursue what truly mattered. As Brandon packed his belongings, he caught his reflection in the mirror. His posture was straighter, his expression more assured. Smiling to himself, he realized this transformation wasn't about wealth or status. It was about becoming the man he was always meant to be. The note on the counter read, "I need to step away for a bit. Don't worry, I'll figure this out." But Derek never came back. The weight of her situation crashed down on Riley like a freight train. She was left stranded in a city where she barely knew anyone, with no financial safety net. The apartment, leased under Derek's name, was repossessed within weeks. Though her parents offered sympathy and unwelcome advice, they couldn't provide the help she truly needed. Her pride kept her from contacting her daughters, who had already voiced their doubts about Derek. For the first time in years, Riley felt completely isolated. The life she had envisioned when she left Brandon now seemed like a cruel farce. The stability she had taken for granted during her marriage had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming uncertainty about her future. One humid afternoon, Riley appeared unannounced at Brandon's door. He had just finished packing the last of his belongings for his move to New York. Seeing her standing there, clutching her purse and looking uncharacteristically unsure, caught him by surprise. "Riley," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "This is unexpected. Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. Brandon nodded and stepped aside to let her enter. The house was nearly empty, its bare walls and stacked boxes a clear sign of his imminent departure. Riley glanced around, her gaze lingering on the changes. "You're leaving," she said softly. "I am," Brandon replied simply. "New York." She nodded, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I heard about the coins. You've done well for yourself." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Why are you here, Riley?" She hesitated before sighing. I need help, Brandon." The admission seemed to weigh heavily on her. Brandon crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Help with what?" "Derek's gone," she admitted quietly, her voice laced with shame and desperation. "He left me with nothing. I don't know where else to turn." Brandon studied her for a long moment. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the confident, self-assured Riley he had once known. She looked tired, defeated. Though a pang of sympathy stirred within him, the bitterness he had worked hard to suppress lingered. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his tone polite but distant. Riley's eyes searched his face. "That's it? After everything we've been through, you're just going to brush me off?" Brandon exhaled deeply, choosing his words carefully. "Riley, I spent years putting your needs before mine. I gave up opportunities because I believed we were building something together. But you made it clear that wasn't enough for you." "That's not fair," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake, Brandon. I see that now." "It's not about fairness," Brandon replied evenly. "It's about moving forward. I've found a new path, and I can't go backward." Riley looked as if she might argue, but instead she nodded. "I understand," she said softly. As she turned to leave, Brandon felt a flicker of guilt, but remained resolute. He had spent too much of his life living for others. This time, he was choosing himself. The days leading up to Brandon's move were a whirlwind of activity. Thanks to Max's diligent efforts, the house sold smoothly, and the new owners were eager to take possession. With the proceeds safely deposited in his account, Brandon focused on clearing out the last remnants of his life in Alabama. Boxes lined the walls of the nearly empty house, each carefully labeled and ready for the movers. Packing became a symbolic act, a way of shedding the weight of his past to make room for a new future. While sorting through his belongings, he came across an old photo album filled with pictures of Alice and Rachel. Flipping through the pages, he smiled at the memories but felt no pang of regret. He had provided them with a stable childhood. Now it was time to focus on himself. The weekend before his departure, Alice and Rachel surprised him with a visit. Their lively energy immediately filled the house. "Dad, this is amazing," Alice said, surveying the organized chaos of packed boxes. "You're really doing it." "I am," Brandon replied with a small smile. Rachel hugged him tightly. "We're so proud of you," she said. "This can't have been easy." "It wasn't," Brandon admitted. "But it's the right move." They spent the day helping him tie up loose ends, sorting through a few last-minute items, and taking a nostalgic walk around the neighborhood. As the sun began to set, they sat together on the front porch, sharing stories and laughter. "You've shown us what it means to keep moving forward," Alice said seriously. "That's a lesson we won't forget." Brandon nodded, his chest swelling with pride. Knowing his daughters admired his resilience was more rewarding than anything money could buy. That evening, Brandon's phone buzzed. It was Adelaide. Her voice carried its usual confident charm. "Brandon, are you ready for the big move?" she asked. "Almost," he replied. "Just tying up a few things." "Good. I've arranged for the movers to deliver your things to my apartment. The spare room is ready, and I expect you to make yourself at home." Brandon chuckled. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Adelaide said, her tone playful. "You're starting a new chapter, and you'll have a front-row seat to the greatest city in the world. What's not to love?" Though he had initially been hesitant about accepting her offer, Brandon now felt a sense of excitement. Adelaide's invitation symbolized more than just convenience. It reflected the bond they had formed and the potential for something greater. As the movers loaded the last of his belongings, Brandon stood outside his Alabama home one final time. The memories, both joyful and painful, felt like a chapter in a book that had reached its conclusion. By the time he boarded the flight to New York, Brandon wasn't just leaving behind a house, he was leaving behind the man he used to be. When the plane landed, Adelaide was waiting for him at the terminal. Her presence was as reassuring as ever. As they walked together into the bustling streets of Manhattan, Brandon felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey wasn't over. It was only beginning. Standing on the balcony of Adelaide's apartment that evening, a glass of wine in hand, Brandon gazed out at the city lights. New York pulsed with energy, a stark contrast to the quiet suburbs of Alabama. It was a city of ambition and reinvention. And for the first time in years, Brandon felt like he belonged. Reflecting on the past months, he marveled at how far he had come. The heartbreak of Riley's betrayal once seemed insurmountable, but now it felt like a distant memory. He had taken control of his life, discovering new opportunities, and leaving behind a chapter that no longer served him. The pain of his divorce had forced Brandon to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. For years he had defined his worth by providing for others, sacrificing his own dreams. Now he was learning to embrace his potential, prioritizing his happiness and growth. Each day in New York brought new opportunities. Brandon immersed himself in researching coin markets, exploring auctions, and enjoying the city's vibrant culture. His bond with Adelaide grew stronger with time. What had started as a professional connection had blossomed into something deeper, though neither felt the need to rush into definitions. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Adelaide asked one evening, her tone curious. "Every day," Brandon said with a smile. "But for once, I'm not rushing to figure it out. I'm enjoying the ride." "Good," she replied, her smile widening. "You deserve that." Brandon's move to New York had opened doors he never knew existed. His expertise in coin collecting had already led to lucrative deals, and he was exploring the possibility of turning his hobby into a full-fledged business. The city's endless opportunities made anything feel achievable. As weeks turned into months, Brandon realized he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The man who once doubted his worth had rediscovered his confidence, fueled by resilience, hard work, and the unwavering support of people like Adelaide and his daughters. For Brandon, the future was no longer a blank slate. It was a vibrant canvas waiting to be filled with the bold colors of a life well lived. And for the first time in years, he felt ready to create something extraordinary.